So today, of course, we heard from the end of Parashat Vayikra and the beginning of Bahar. Sometimes we don't think about what is the Har, but the Har, the mountain, is Mount Sinai. And it's funny, for a tradition that, celebrates or at least acknowledges those 40 years of wandering. The 40 years of wandering actually occur in a fairly narrow frame of the Torah's arc. It's in the book of Numbers, which is coming next week, but we're still planted there at Sinai. And a question I want to consider before we do a little learning together today is a question of revelation. Was that moment at Sinai a one-time experience, or does it point us to something deeper? And one way to find an answer to that question is in your Siddur on page 252. So if you want to take out your prayer book, this is going to be a participatory sermon, meaning that it's not going to be a sermon, it's going to be more of a learning and a little bit of singing later. So on 252, we have the beginning of the fifth parak of Pirkei Avot. And the first Mishnah, Pirkei Avot is a text from the Mishnah, comes from the year 200 CE, from the north of the land of Israel, from the Galilee. And it says here, Ba'asara ma'amarot nivra olam. The world was created by 10 utterances. It doesn't really go into what those utterances were exactly, but this chapter of Pirkei Avot is particularly interested in numbers. So the previous prakim were often bringing lessons that were attributed to a particular rabbi. Here in this chapter, we have a list of numbers, 10 of this and 7 of that and 4 of this and 3 of that. So the world was created by 10 utterances. Since it could have been created by one, right, by God speaking once the world into existence, what does this teach? It teaches us that the punishment of the wicked who destroy a world created by 10 utterances is multiplied, while the righteous who preserve a world created by 10 utterances are richly rewarded. And I want to draw our attention to the commentary on the left-hand column. There are 2 wonderful commentaries that are contained within our Lev Shalem Siddur. This one comes from Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum, who's a rabbi of a wonderful egalitarian community in Baka in Jerusalem called Kilat Zion. And this is what Rabbi Elad Applebaum writes. Created by 10 utterances, the verb nivra used here to describe creation should be construed not as a past tense, was created, but as present continuous, is being created. The world is not binary, and the divine speech is not a one-time event in the past. History is the branching out of the 10 divine utterances. The past and future are dependent on those ever-continuous utterances. The righteous, the tzaddikim, she writes, are those who can identify the continuous creation, that it's always in process among the many voices in reality, and evil persons are those who shut out from the world those multiple voices of creation, leaving only single-minded conception that is unsustainable. So there's a lot we could say about that, but what I wanted to focus on for a moment is a move that Rabbi Tamar does here. She talks not only about the continuing of revelation, right, the unfolding of the creative enterprise throughout the generations, but she does something really interesting here. She connects that to a sense of continuing revelation. In other words, creation and revelation are interwoven, and that the unfolding, unfurling world invites an unfolding and unfurling of humanity or God's presence in the world, and also potentially a presence or of villainy, right, of those who want to do harm with words. Now, it's not an accident that I am bringing Pirkei Avot today. Anyone know why it's not an accident? So by tradition, we learn Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Shavuot during Sfirat HaOmer. This is a long-standing tradition. Often it's done at Shabbos afternoon around Mincha. It's like a nice thing to do between Mincha and Mariv. On Shabbat afternoon, you get a little Torah learning in. And here we get this learning and you do one chapter each week. And that works out very nicely because there are 6 Shabbatot that come between Pesach and Shavuot, and there are 6 chapters of Pirkei Avot. And it's also not an accident that I'm bringing you the 5th parak of Pirkei Avot, because of course, next week is the 6th Shabbat after Pesach, which means the Shabbat after that will also include, this year it happens to fall on Shabbat too, is Shavuot, right? So chapter 5 happens to be one of my favorite prakim. And so what I'd like to do today is actually spend about 5 minutes in Chavruta. I know this room doesn't easily lend itself to Chavruta learning, but I was thinking about what I wanted to say this week, and while I don't usually build my remarks around a particular family, I was thinking there's another reason that's coming later, but this particular family I know comes out of the Chavurah movement, and one of the things that I learned from the Chavurah movement is the importance of not having just rabbis tell you what the Torah is about or explaining things to you, but actually discovering it yourself. And one of my mentors, Rabbi Harold Scholweis, did a wonderful thing at Valley Beth Shalom in California, which is he brought the Chavurah movement into synagogues, right? So this is not something that need exist only outside of synagogues, though it certainly can, but also here. So I thought, as long as we're doing Pirkei Avot, and as long as it's the 5th parak, and as long as there's this song that I want to sing later, for warning to those who are uncomfortable with guitar in shul, you now know it's coming, so you can make your choice later on, however you like. But also to be able to take a few moments to actually learn with and from one another. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to break us into 4 quadrants. 4 quadrants, okay? So you're A, B, C, D, okay? It's a small but mighty quadrant D. If if a few folks over there want to do also D, that's okay. Okay? And what I'd like you to do is find somebody nearby. If there's somebody nearby who doesn't have a chavruta, invite them to join your chavruta. Groups of 2 or 3 is fine. Don't try to do like groups of 7 right now. Okay? And what I'd like you to do is group A, you're going to do, it's all in the 5th chapter. You're going to do Mishnah 7. Okay? Mishnah 7, group A, about the 10 miracles in the temple. Group B, you're going to do 10 things God created at dusk. That's Mishnah 8. Mishnah 8. Group C, you're going to do the 4 temperaments. That's Mishnah 13. And group D, you're going to do Mishnah 19, which is about argumentation. Okay, got it? So 7, 8, 13, 19. We're going to take 5 minutes. When we're finished, I may ask maybe one person. We're not going to do a long talk back. I'm hoping that you'll just discover some interesting things within the chapter. And then we'll do a kind of closing song together I'd like to teach you today. All right. So as they say in our literature, say omad, go learn. So I'd love to hear maybe one comment per kfutza here. If you, so how about someone from Mishnah 7, from our group A over there? Someone who read, this is since you didn't all read each other's, and there's a chance to learn from one another here. So this is Asara Nisim Nasa'u Levotenu B'Veit HaMikdash. So there are 10 miracles that were performed and the ancestors of our temple. And I'm curious if there's anyone from this group who has something they want to say, something interesting you found. Was it this group over here? Is this right? Something interesting you found, discovered from this text. Surprising, not surprising, relevant, not relevant. Anyone? No? All right, Celeste. Yeah, here, may I shove a microphone in your face? There you
Sure.
go. Okay.
So we really liked our parak, and our favorite part was, so ours is 10 miracles are performed for the ancestors in the temple, and they're all really everyday miracles. There are things like there are no flies in the slaughterhouse, and there's no scorpion or serpent ever injured anyone in Jerusalem. But our favorite was No one complained it is too crowded for me to lodge overnight in Jerusalem. Apparently, this was a very common complaint, and all the things in this paragraph were very common everyday things. And that was a good light on everyday life then.
I love it. So a non-complaining population, a non-complaining Jerusalem, and also like a Jerusalem that has space is something interesting to contemplate. What does it mean for 1 kilometer squared to have infinite space? Someone from Group B want to share some observations, something you learned from your section? That would be over here. I'm going to grab my... Yes, Neil. So this is the one. Tell us what it was and tell us something about it.
Well, this all comes from the gentleman in front of me, but I'll interpret it. So it says 10 things were created on the Eve of Shabbos, which is literally the end of creation, the Eve of Shabbos. So they've created the whole physical world and all the heavens and the earth and the things we know how they work. But there's other things that are inexplicable that are going to happen over the years and over the millennia. And if they're in the world and they're inexplicable, perhaps they won't be attributable to the people to God. So they throw these last 10 things that are all things that aren't part of the physical world, but they are now attributable to creation, so they have that same godliness rather than some other kind of source.
Okay. Anything interesting in particular about it that you found?
Just the necessity to put it in there, saying, okay, where's all this stuff come from? If it doesn't come from God, then it comes from somewhere else, and I think that somewhere else is not a place the writers of this wanted to go politically.
So we have like sort of an interesting tension between this idea of ongoing creation that I was talking about earlier, and also this idea that, well, but like maybe the creation happens in ways that are not about like creating talking donkeys or creating this magical worm that's going to chew through stone, or tongs, because you need tongs to make tongs, as this group is exploring. How about this one over here, Mishnah 13. Riley, you want to tell us something you learned about the 4 temperaments?
So we had the 4 temperaments, which is people whose gain is canceled by loss, whose loss is canceled by gain, who are saintly and who are scoundrels. And what I think it's important to note is, while we all want to be saints and we all want to be difficult to provoke and easy to appease, at some point in our lives we are going to be all 4 of these, and we need to be understanding of all 4 aspects.
Love it. Thank you, Riley. Beautiful observation. So that was Mishnah 13. And what about Mishnah 19? Anyone from our small but mighty Team D want to share something that you learned from this one? What do you think? Aaron? All right, Aaron, go for it.
We were just talking about the difference between sort of like that argument that stimulates you, like the sort of Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish kind of like arguing that challenges and like grows your knowledge, rather than the argument that just and
Great.
getting sucked into the ground, like the rebellion of Korach, that like, okay, what did that teach us?
Great. So these 2 different kinds, for those who aren't familiar, that these 2 different kinds of argumentation are L'Shem Shamayim and L'Shem Shamayim, right? That it's for the sake of heaven or not for the sake of heaven. And they give these 2 different examples. And you're saying what distinguishes them, what's good about arguments for the sake of heaven? What makes them for the sake of heaven?
That it's sort of stimulating your thought, that sort of, rather than somebody just saying, okay, yes, you're right, but sort of like, well, it's honing your argument, that you have to, you're being challenged, and you have to kind of come up with more reasons to support your argument.
Great. It's like the difference between sort of mean-spirited stand-up comedy and improv, right? If anyone's ever done improv is all about yes and, right? So you're not contradicting or disparaging or putting down. You're sort of building something together. So there's a kind of a collaborative enterprise there of argumentation for the sake of heaven. That's great. So thanks. There's a lot we could say about all of this. Maybe this afternoon you'll spend a little more time. I wanted you to be aware of this resource because the Siddur is a wonderful Siddur in many ways, but having Pirkei Avot there, just in case in a 2.5-hour service, you ever find yourself not entirely enthralled with every minute of the service, which I know is hard to imagine. But if that were to happen to you and you thought, oh, maybe I'll learn something, you could learn some Pirkei Avot in the book. So I want to conclude by teaching us a song, and the words of this actually come from nearly the end. There are two statements in here. Stay. Okay. So there are in your it's either in the Siddur near the end of chapter 5. There are two statements, and it's also in your program. If you look in your program, where is it in the program here? May I? So it's on the back at the top. Okay, so if you need the transliteration for the Hebrew, that's there. The translation is in both places. There are two statements. One's by Ben Bagbag, and the other is by Ben Heihei. I think these are the only things that Ben Bagbag and Ben Heihei probably ever said. And not entirely clear that these are real people, but that's not important. What is important is that Ben Bagbag had something, I think, especially profound to say. And my family and I have a special relationship with the melody that I'm going to teach you now, because I am celebrating this coming week my high anniversary of becoming a rabbi, 18 years ago in May, and since we're finishing Sefer Vayikra, it felt like doing something summative would be appropriate also from our fifth Perek. And Miriam and my mother, my late father, and my in-laws commissions Craig Taubman to write a piece of music to go along with this section from Pirkei Avot. Hafoch ba v'afoch ba decholava, uva tachazei v'siv uvaleva uminala tazu'a, she'en la midat tova himena. So Ben Bagbag taught, study it and review it. You will find everything in it. Scrutinize it, grow old and gray in it. Do not depart from it. There is no better portion in life than this. So I want to teach you the melody. This, of course, is about Torah, though I think it could speak to a lot of things. The idea that we should engage with it over and over again, and new secrets may reveal themselves to us if we're willing to kind of come back to do that chazara. So I'll sing it through. Feel free to just join me when you start getting it. Do it a couple of times. Hafoch ba, v'hafoch ba, decholava, uva techazei, v'siv uvaleva, uminala tezuah. Try it with me. Hafoch ba, v'hafoch ba, decholava, uva techazei, v'siv uvaleva, uminala tezuah. Hafoch ba, v'hafoch ba, decholava, uva techazei, v'siv uvaleva, uminala tezuah, she'en lach midat tova. Amen. Let's do it from the top. Hafoch ba, v'hafoch ba, decholava, uva techazei, v'siv uvaleva, uminala tezuah. בה, והפוך בה, תחולה בה, ובה תחזה, וסיבוב הלבה, ומנהלה תזוהה, שאין לך מידה טובה. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.